The gas lamps of Victorian London flicker like distant stars against the thick evening fog, casting long shadows over cobblestone streets where secrets whisper just beyond sight. In the heart of Baker Street, behind the curtained windows of 221B, Sherlock Holmes leans over his cluttered desk, the glow of the fireplace painting his sharp features in gold and shadow. Across from him, Dr. Watson stirs his tea, the steam curling into the air as the clock ticks toward midnight. Then a knock at the door, sharp and insistent, shattering the quiet like a pane of glass. The visitor's gloves are stained with rain, her face hidden beneath a veil, but the tremor in her voice betrays her. A noblewoman, her family's most precious heirloom, a tiara worth a king's ransom, shattered into pieces, and with it the honor of her house. This isn't just a broken trinket. The tiara's diamonds are intact, its gold unblemished, yet it lies in fragments, as if some unseen hand had twisted it apart with unnatural precision. No sign of forced entry, no fingerprints, only a single cryptic note left where the tiara once rested, its ink still damp when discovered. The police are baffled. The newspapers dare not print a word, and now the matter lands squarely in the hands of the world's only consulting detective. Holmes's eyes gleam as he holds a fragment to the light, murmuring what Watson knows too well. The game, my dear fellow, is afoot. What follows is a maze of deception, where every glittering facade hides a darker truth. The noblewoman's servants swear they saw nothing. The tiara's maker insists it was unbreakable by any ordinary means. And beneath it all, a rumor slithers through London's elite, a shadowy collector who pays fortunes for the impossible, no matter the cost. Why break a tiara instead of stealing it? Who stands to gain from such a calculated act of ruin? As Holmes and Watson plunge deeper, they'll untangle a web stretching from high society's ballrooms to the city's most dangerous corners, where the greatest mystery isn't the how but the why. So lean in and listen closely. By the time the final clue falls into place, you'll see the truth was hiding in plain sight all along. The door swings open with a gust of damp London air, and there she stands, Lady Helena Fairfax, her silk skirts rustling like fallen leaves, her gloved hands clutching a velvet box, as if it might vanish at any moment. Her breath comes in shallow gasps, her voice barely above a whisper as she steps into the firelight, her veil trembling with every word. "Mr. Holmes, you must help me." It's gone, no, not gone, broken deliberately, cruelly. She sets the box on the table with a shudder, the lid creaking open to reveal the wreckage inside. The tiara, once a masterpiece of craftsmanship, now a jagged puzzle of gold and gems. Watson leans forward, his medical eye catching the way her pulse flutters at her throat. Shock, yes, but something sharper, fear, not of theft, but of exposure. Holmes, meanwhile, says nothing. His fingers hover over the fragments, tracing the edges with a surgeon's precision. No clean breaks here, no signs of a hammer or chisel. The metal appears almost unwound, as if some force had unraveled it from within. Lady Helena's story spills out between sips of brandy, the tiara, displayed in its case that very evening for a select few guests. No one entered the room, no one touched it. Yet when the case was opened after supper, the damage was done, and then, here her voice cracks, the note, slipped beneath the tiara's velvet stand, its message chilling in its simplicity. A crown unfit for the head that wears it. The room falls silent, but for the crackling fire. Holmes's gaze flicks to the mantel clock, then to the window where the fog presses close. This isn't mere mischief. The tiara wasn't stolen because theft would be too ordinary. This was a message, a performance, and the audience. Whoever shattered the tiara is still out there, waiting for the next act to begin. Holmes lifts one twisted fragment of the tiara into the lamplight, turning it slowly between his fingers. The break isn't jagged, as one might expect from a hammer's blow, nor melted as if by heat. Instead, the gold appears stretched thin, almost frayed at the edges, like cloth unraveled thread by thread. Watson frowns, leaning closer. Good heavens, Holmes, it looks as though it's been pulled apart by some invisible force. A faint smile flickers across Holmes's lips. Precisely, Watson. Observe the striations here, these minute grooves running parallel to the break. No tool made by human hands leaves marks quite like these. His fingertip traces the unnatural pattern, then pauses at a nearly imperceptible discoloration along the metal. A faint, iridescent sheen, like oil on water. He brings the fragment to his nose and inhales sharply. Our bitter almonds, faint but unmistakable. Watson's eyes widen. Cyanide residue, but how? Not cyanide, Holmes murmurs. Something far more specialized. He reaches for his magnifying glass, examining the tiara's central setting where the largest diamond once sat. The prongs are bent outward, not snapped, as if compelled by some outward pressure. And there, almost invisible, a tiny puncture in the gold, no wider than a pinprick. Holmes's voice drops to a whisper. This wasn't broken, Watson. It was unmade. Deliberately, methodically. Someone didn't just want to destroy the tiara, they wanted to humiliate its owner. To prove they could reduce a symbol of power to ruin without so much as touching it. Lady Elena lets out a choked gasp. But who could possess such knowledge, such cruelty? Holmes doesn't answer immediately. His gaze drifts to the cryptic note still lying on the table. A crown unfit for the head that wears it. And then to the window, where the fog coils like a living thing. There are perhaps 3 people in Europe capable of engineering this, and only one who would leave a calling card. His fingers drum once against the desk. Tell me, Lady Elena, has your family recently refused an offer? A purchase, perhaps, from someone with unconventional tastes? Her silence is answer enough. The fire pops, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolls the hour, its echo swallowed by the night. The game indeed is afoot, but this time the stakes stretch far beyond a broken treasure. Lady Elena's fingers tighten around her teacup as she begins, her voice steadier now but still edged with unease. The tiara was kept in the blue drawing room, a locked display case, positioned between 2 windows where the light could catch the diamonds at every hour. Only myself, the butler, and my lady's maid had keys. She pauses, her gaze darting to the fire as if searching for courage in the flames. The case was opened twice that evening, once before dinner, when I showed it to our guests, and again afterward, when we found it like this. Watson scribbles in his notebook. And the guests, anyone who seemed overly interested, or perhaps less interested than they ought to have been. A brittle laugh escapes her. They all admired it, Doctor. That's what one does with a Fairfax heirloom. But there was a man, a Baron von Hohenheim, a recent acquaintance of my husband's. He barely glanced at it during the viewing. Yet I caught him lingering near the room twice after dinner, though he claimed he was searching for the smoking parlor. Her glove twists in her lap. And then there's my maid, Marie. She's been jumpy all week, dropping things, forgetting orders. This morning I found her weeping in the pantry. When I pressed her, she swore it was nothing, but... Her voice drops to a whisper. Her brother works in a chemist's shop, one that specializes in unconventional compounds. Holmes, who has been silently examining a scrap of torn lace from the tiara's padding, suddenly lifts his head. This Baron described his gloves. Lady Elena blinks. Gloves, they were black kid leather, I suppose, quite ordinary. Ordinary. Holmes plucks a nearly invisible fibre from the lace, holding it up to the light. Then why does this strand of horsehair used exclusively in Prussian cavalry gloves cling to the velvet where the tiara rested? His eyes gleam. Tell me, did the Baron's gloves squeak when he moved his hands? The colour drains from Lady Eleanor's face. Yes, how could you possibly? Because horsehair, when treated with certain oils, produces that distinctive sound. Holmes rises abruptly, pacing to the window. And Prussian officers oil their gloves to preserve them in damp climates, a habit difficult to break, even in London. The fog outside swirls as if stirred by his thoughts. Your maid's distress, the Baron's presence, the chemist's brother, none are coincidences. They're brushstrokes in a larger portrait. He turns back, his silhouette sharp against the glass. One question remains. Who precisely does this Baron collect for? The clock strikes one. Somewhere in the street below, a carriage rattles past, its lanterns cutting brief, golden wounds through the dark. Holmes sweeps the fragments into a careful arrangement on the desk. Each piece placed with deliberate precision, as if reconstructing a crime scene in miniature. His fingers hover over the central diamond, setting once more, tapping the tiny puncture mark. Observe, Watson. This is no ordinary damage. The gold hasn't fractured under stress. It's been dissolved. Not by acid, but by a reagent so precise it targets only the molecular bonds in the alloy, leaving the diamonds untouched. His voice drops, almost to himself. Von Hohenheim didn't just commission this act. He orchestrated it. The gloves, the timing, even the note, every detail is a calculated move in a far larger game. Watson leans in, his medical mind grappling with the implications. You're suggesting the tiara was sabotaged chemically, but how could anyone predict exactly how it would break? Because they didn't need to predict. Holmes replies, plucking a single, hair-thin wire from the velvet lining. They controlled it. This wire embedded in the padding would have conducted an electrical current, triggering the reagent at a specific time. A remote demolition, Watson, disguised as an impossibility. His eyes flick to Lady Eleanor, who sits frozen, her cup trembling in her hands. Tell me, was the tiara recently cleaned or adjusted? Perhaps before the party. She nods aghast. Yes, Marie insisted it needed polishing. She took it to the jeweler's just yesterday. The same jeweler whose apprentice is her brother, Holmes finishes. A chain of pawns, each unaware they're advancing another's strategy. He rises abruptly, snatching his coat from the rack. Von Hohenheim isn't the mastermind here. He's a middleman. This method, this theatrical cruelty, his jaw tightens. It reeks of one man's signature, Professor James Moriarty. The name hangs in the air like gunpowder smoke. Watson pales. Lady Eleanor's breath catches. The Napoleon of crime. Holmes' smile is razor thin. Precisely. And if he's taken an interest in your tiara, my lady, it wasn't the treasure he wanted broken. It was your family's reputation. He strides toward the door, pausing only to pluck a single, twisted gold thread from the wreckage. One unnoticed until now, its ends frayed not by force, but by design. Because some games aren't played for wealth, Watson. They're played for the thrill of watching kingdoms tremble. The cobblestones of Fairfax Manor crunch underfoot as Holmes and Watson approach the servants' entrance, their footsteps muffled by the creeping morning mist. Inside, the household staff huddle like startled birds, the butler, rigid as a poker in his starched collar. The lady's maid, Marie, twisting her apron strings into knots. The footman, eyes darting to the clock as if willing time to reverse. Holmes doesn't sit. He prowls the cramped parlor, his gaze dissecting every twitch, every bead of sweat. Let us begin, he says softly. with who entered the blue drawing-room after dinner. The butler's alibi is flawless. He was tallying the silver in the pantry, witnessed by 2 kitchen maids. The footman swears he escorted guests to their carriages, though his left shoe bears a fresh scuff from the drawing-room's brass threshold. But it's Marie who falters. Her story of fetching a shawl unravels seam by seam. The shawl was wool, she claims, yet the evening was unseasonably warm. Her brother's name slips out when Watson mentions the chemist's shop, and her hands fly to her mouth as if to stuff the words back in. Holmes pounces. Your brother prepared the reagent, didn't he? A colourless liquid, slight almond scent, kept cold until use. Marie's knees buckle. She confesses in gasps. The Baron had cornered her brother weeks prior, threatening his debts. The polishing was a ruse. She'd slipped the vial into the Tiara's case, never guessing the damage it would do. But why not steal it? Watson presses. Holmes answers for her, plucking a newspaper from the side table. Because today's society pages call Lady Elena careless with her heirlooms. Ruin is louder than theft, Watson. And far more delicious to certain appetites. The footman's scuffed shoe squeaks as he edges toward the door. Holmes doesn't turn. Going somewhere, Mr. Pike, or should I say, former Prussian cavalry. The man freezes. A telltale thread clings to his cuff, the same iridescent gold as the tiara's unraveling. The game's final piece snaps into place. Von Hohenheim's gloves, Marie's brother, the footman's nervous glances, all threads in Moriarty's web, and the tiara. Merely the first strand to be plucked. The butler stands stiff as a waxwork, his gloved hands folded behind his back, too still, too practiced. Holmes circles him like a falcon eyeing prey, noting the barely perceptible tremor in his left thumb, the way his starched collar digs just slightly deeper into his neck on the right side. You inventoried the silver after dinner, Holmes muses, plucking a stray thread from the man's immaculate sleeve. Yet your ledger shows no entry for the candlesticks removed for polishing that morning. A beat of silence. The kitchen maids who swore to his alibi shift uncomfortably near the hearth. Watson watches the butler's Adam's apple bob once, twice before he replies. An oversight, sir. The silver was counted and returned by midnight. Midnight. Holmes's smile is knife sharp. The grandfather clock in the pantry chimes 11:43, and your entry is timed at 11:50. Curious, then, that the kitchen maid's testimony places you there until the stroke of 12. He flicks open the ledger again, revealing a smudge of violet ink, Lady Elena's signature shade, used exclusively for sealing invitations. And even more curious, that this smear matches the wax on the tiara's display case key. The butler's breath hitches. Watson leans in, catching the faintest whiff of bitter almonds beneath the man's lavender cologne. Holmes doesn't miss it either. You didn't just know the tiara's security, he murmurs. You tested it. The night before, wasn't it? A dry run with the key, leaving that telltale smear when you resealed the wax. A log collapses in the fireplace, sending up a shower of sparks. The butler's polished veneer cracks just a hair as his gaze darts to the window. Not toward escape, Watson realizes, but toward the stables, where a certain Prussian baron's carriage had been kept waiting long after the other guests departed. Holmes's voice drops to a whisper. Tell me, when Moriarty's men promised you payment, did they specify it would be in silver? Orleed, the butler, pales. In the distance, a horse whinnies, whether in warning or agreement. Even Holmes couldn't say. Marie's hands flutter like trapped birds as Holmes advances, his shadow swallowing hers against the pantry wall. She claims ignorance, yet her gaze keeps snagging on the monogrammed handkerchief tucked in her sleeve. Initials not her own. Watson spots it first. A telltale V. H, embroidered in Prussian blue thread. Holmes doesn't ask. He simply lifts her wrist, exposing a fading bruise beneath her cuff, the precise shape of a signet ring's crest. The Baron's grip leaves distinctive marks. He murmurs, rather careless of him. The revelation unfurls in ragged pieces. Marie's brother didn't just work at the chemist's shop he'd apprenticed under a man recently vanished from Berlin, a specialist in molecular destabilization. The same man, Holmes interjects, who once crafted dissolving ink for a Vienna jewel thief known as dye spin. The spider's webs stretch far. He muses, plucking a hairpin from Marie's apron, its tip sharpened to a pick's precision. Especially when spun with blackmail. Marie crumples. Her brother's gambling debts, the Baron's generous loan, the whispered instructions to slip the vial into the tiara's padding during polishing. He said it would tarnish the metal, nothing more, she sobs. Watson pities her, until Holmes extracts the crumpled banknote from her bodice, its serial number matching funds traced to a shell company in Moriarty's web. But the true dagger comes last. The handkerchief isn't von Hohenheim's. It's a replica, down to the starch in the folds. A forger's touch. Holmes notes, holding it to the light where the threads reveal uneven tension. The hallmark of Dye Spin's late wife, a seamstress turned counterfeiter. You weren't just his pawn, Marie, you're his legacy. Her silent tears confirm what Holmes already knew. Some crimes aren't committed for gold, but for the ghosts who whisper the orders. The tiara was never the target. It was the loom on which an old spider meant to weave his comeback. Watson exhales sharply as the final thread snaps. The maid's confession, the Baron's gloves, the chemist's vanished mentor, all lead to one inescapable truth. Moriarty hasn't resurfaced for a jewel. He's rebuilding his network, one broken treasure at a time, and Holmes, he's already reaching for his coat, eyes alight with the oldest hunger of all, the chase. The morning dew still clung to the grass as Holmes knelt beside the rose garden's iron gate, his magnifying glass catching the first pale light of dawn. There, half buried in the soft earth beneath a tangled spray of climbing ivy, lay the imprint of a boot, not the neat, squared heel of a gentleman's fashion, but the deep, studded tread of a workman's shoe. Watson crouched beside him, frowning. One of the gardeners. Holmes shook his head, brushing aside a petal to reveal a second mark narrower, sharper, as if the wearer had pivoted abruptly. These aren't from labor, note the depth, too shallow for digging, yet too deliberate for passing foot traffic. Someone stood here, Watson, for several minutes at least. His fingers traced the impression's edge, stopping where the soil dipped unnaturally. And they carried weight, something heavy enough to leave this depression. Then he stiffened. Half hidden beneath a hydrangea leaf glinted a twisted sliver of metal, no larger than a thumbnail. Holmes held it up, the rising sun painting its surface a dull copper. Not metal, he murmured, gilded porcelain from a snuff-box, perhaps, or a watch casing. Watson leaned closer, spotting the faintest engraving along one edge, a tiny, stylized spider. Marie had mentioned Dye Spin's taste for marked trophies, the footman's Prussian connections, the butler's too perfect alibi. Now this, a boot print from a man who didn't belong, and a broken trinket that whispered of old, venomous habits. Holmes pocketed the fragment with a quiet click of finality. Some spiders didn't just weave webs, they left their signatures in the mud. The blue drawing room of Fairfax Manor was, by all accounts, a vault draped in velvet and guarded by tradition. Its heavy oak door bore a lock crafted by Chubb himself, the key entrusted only to Lady Elena and her butler. The windows, tall and elegant, were fitted with iron bars so finely wrought they seemed decorative, until one tested their strength. And yet Holmes's fingertips trace the keyhole now, finding what others missed. A hairline scratch along the brass plate, fresh enough to catch the light. A lock is only as strong as the hands that turn it. He murmurs, crouching to examine the threshold where a sliver of wax betrays an unbroken seal. The case was never forced. The windows untouched, every protocol followed to the letter. Watson frowns at the display case, its glass pane flawless. If no one entered, how? Observe the hinges. Holmes interrupts, tilting the case forward. The screws gleam, their heads unmarred. But the wood beneath tells another story, microscopic splinters. Too fresh to belong to the original installation. This case was opened not with a key, but with precision. A screwdriver ground to mimic the exact angle of these fastenings, turned just enough to loosen without detection. His finger pauses on the velvet lining, where an almost imperceptible indentation mars the fabric. The tiara never left its case until the moment of sabotage. The reagent was planted days prior, timed to activate during the party. A locked room is only a puzzle if one assumes the crime happened inside it. Lady Elena's gloved hand flies to her throat. But the room was watched. The footman was stationed outside. Holmes finishes, nodding to the hallway where the man had stood sentry. Tell me, my lady, did he ever lean against this wall? Perhaps to adjust his sleeve. He presses his own shoulder to the wallpaper, demonstrating how the position would have placed the footman's ear inches from a ventilation grate, one leading straight to the stables. The perfect conduit for whispered instructions, or the faint squeak of Prussian gloves. Security, Holmes reveals, is a tapestry, cut one thread, the butler's ledger, the maid's loyalty, the footman's posture, and the entire design unravels. The true genius of this theft wasn't breaking in. It was ensuring the room stayed locked, making the impossible seem inevitable. And as Holmes lifts a single strand of horsehair from the grate identical to the Baron's gloves, the irony settles like dust. The most secure rooms often hide the deepest cracks. Holmes clears the sitting room table with a single sweep of his arm, sending papers and teacups tumbling into Watson's lap. Before the doctor can protest, a roll of butcher's paper unfurls across the oak surface, pinned down at the corners with a revolver, a microscope, and 2 volumes of British metallurgy. Recreation, Holmes mutters, arranging fragments of sealing wax in a precise semicircle. The mind may lie, Watson, but chemistry never does. He produces an exact replica of Lady Elena's tiara, or rather, what appears to be one crafted from gilded wire and paste gems. Courtesy of the Blackfriars Theatre's prop master, he explains, positioning it atop a velvet-lined box identical to the original. Then, from his pocket, a vial no larger than a thimble, filled with a liquid so clear it seems invisible. Watson leans in, recognizing the faint almond scent at once. "You're not seriously. Observe." Holmes dips a horsehair brush into the vial, then paints a single, nearly imperceptible line along the tiara's central band. The effect isn't immediate. For 3 agonizing minutes, nothing happens. Then, a whisper of sound like silk tearing, as the gold begins to unwind, not melt, not crack. The metal simply relaxes its microscopic bonds, surrendering one by one until the tiara slumps into pieces as neatly as a disassembled clock. Watson's pencil snaps in his grip. Good God, Holmes, that's not science, that's alchemy. Precisely what Moriarty wants us to think. Holmes lifts one deformed fragment with tweezers, revealing how the chemical selectively targeted the alloy while leaving the paste gems intact. But notice the pattern. The reaction spread outward from the brushstroke, following the metal's grain. No random fracturing, no collateral damage. He taps the vial. This wasn't designed to destroy. It was engineered to humiliate, to make ruin look effortless. He then positions Watson by the door with a pocket watch. "You're the footman? Count 45 seconds after I enter." Holmes strides out, returns precisely on cue, and using nothing but a straightened hairpin, loosens the display case screws just enough to lift the glass without triggering the alarm. The entire theft takes less than 90 seconds, leaving no fingerprints, no broken seals, just the tiara's ghostly outline in the velvet. Watson exhales sharply. So the crime scene was staged after the fact. The broken tiara was merely the final act. Correction, the reveal. Holmes sweeps the fragments into an envelope, his smile knife-sharp. Because the real masterpiece wasn't stealing the tiara. It was convincing the world it shattered itself. Holmes runs his finger along the underside of the tiara's display case, his nail catching on what should be seamless mahogany. A fraction of a second's hesitation, then the wood gives way with a soft click, revealing a compartment so shallow it's nearly invisible. Inside lies not gold or gems, but a single slip of paper, yellowed at the edges, its surface covered in a tight grid of numbers and symbols. Watson leans in, squinting. A cipher? No. Holmes holds the paper to the light, revealing a watermark, a crest belonging to the Fairfax family's private bank. A ledger page, trimmed to fit, likely torn from a larger record. His thumb brushes the edge, where a single drop of wax stains the corner. Not the deep violet of Lady Eleanor's seal, but a dull red, the kind used by stewards to mark household accounts. The implications unfold like a slow poison. The compartment isn't just hidden, it's worn smooth from use. Whoever placed this here didn't stumble upon the space, they knew it existed. And the numbers, Holmes traces a column with clinical precision. Payments. Dates correspond to the weeks following Lady Eleanor's father's death, when the estate's jewels were last inventoried. His voice drops. These aren't theft records, they're bribes. Watson's breath catches, the butler's perfect alibi, the maid's sudden debts, the footman's Prussian connections, all threads leading back to one inescapable truth. The tiara was never the target. The real treasure was the compartment itself, used for years to pass secrets under the very nose of the Fairfax family. Holmes lifts the paper, and the lamplight reveals what Watson missed, a second layer of writing. So faint it's nearly transparent. A list of names, each followed by a sum. Not the usual flowing script of a steward, but the jagged shorthand of a man who traffics in silence. And at the bottom, half obscured by a wine stain, a single word, spider. The game hasn't just been afoot. It's been living in the walls. Lady Eleanor's teacup clatters against its saucer, the sound too sharp, too sudden for a woman of her breeding. Holmes doesn't flinch. Instead, he retrieves a folded newspaper from his coat yesterday's society pages, its edges frayed from handling. The headline is innocuous: Fairfax Ball to celebrate heirloom's return. But the subtext thrums between them like a plucked violin string. Watson leans in, squinting at the grainy photograph beneath, Lady Eleanor, resplendent in emeralds, her hand resting on her husband's arm. Only Holmes notices how her fingers clutch his sleeve, not with affection, but with the white-knuckled grip of a drowning woman. The tiara wasn't merely displayed that evening. Holmes murmurs, sliding the paper across the desk. It was reintroduced after a 6-month absence from the family vault. Curious timing, given your husband's recent financial recalibrations. The euphemism hangs in the air like fog. Lord Fairfax's gambling debts are an open secret among London's elite. His desperation thickening the air at every card table from White's to the Diogenes Club. Lady Eleanor's breath hitches. Her glove twitches toward her bodice, a reflexive gesture Holmes intercepts with a glance. There, half hidden beneath lace, glints a thin gold chain. Not jewellery, a key, the kind used for safety deposit boxes or private vaults. Watson's medical eye catches the faint abrasion around her neck where the chain has recently been yanked hard enough to bruise. Holmes's voice drops to a whisper. Your husband demanded the tiara's return, didn't he? Not for sentiment, for collateral. The pieces align with brutal clarity, the nobleman's debts, the hasty withdrawal of the heirloom, the coincidental timing of its destruction, just as the most ruthless moneylenders tightened their grip. But then Holmes does what even Watson doesn't expect. He reaches into the shattered tiara's box, extracting not gold or glass, but a scrap of parchment wedged beneath the velvet. The handwriting is frantic, ink smeared as if written in haste. Elena, the child is safe, burn this, the room tilts. Watson's chair scrapes backward. Lady Elena sways, her face the color of spoiled milk. You must understand, she chokes out. The tiara was insured for triple its value. The money was never for debts. It was for her. And just like that, the case fractures into something far darker, because the note isn't new. The paper is brittle with age, the ink faded. That child, born 20 years ago, according to the birth registry Holmes had Watson pull that very morning. A daughter, illegitimate, raised in secrecy under the care of a now deceased lady's maid, Marie's predecessor. Holmes's fingers tighten around the parchment. The baron's gloves, the butler's ledger, the footman's Prussian ties, all red herrings. The true architect of this ruin doesn't lurk in shadows. She sits before them, her silk skirts rustling with every tremble. The tiara wasn't broken to humiliate the Fairfax name. It was sacrificed to protect one infinitely more precious. And the note left behind, not a taunt, but a warning from someone who knew exactly where Lady Eleanor's heart truly lay. Some secrets aren't merely hidden. They're buried alive, and Holmes has just kicked open the coffin. Watson slaps his notebook shut with the triumphant air of a man who's just solved the riddle of the Sphinx. It's obvious Holmes, the Baron's Prussian connections, the chemical reagent. This was an act of international espionage. The tiara's design must have concealed some state secret, and von Hohenheim was sent to destroy it before the Crown could uncover. Holmes doesn't roll his eyes. The twitch of his left pinky finger is subtler than that, but the effect is the same. He plucks the notebook from Watson's grasp, flips to a dog-eared page, and taps an entry dated 3 days prior. Lady Eleanor's garden party. Baron von Hohenheim arrived late, departed early. Spoke exclusively to the Austrian attaché about Watson's own handwriting trails off into a squiggle. You didn't overhear their conversation, did you? Holmes murmurs. Because if you had, you'd know they discussed vine blight and thoroughbreds. Hardly the stuff of clandestine plots. Watson's mustache bristles. Then the maid's brother, the chemist. His knowledge of molecular destabilization could be replicated by any first-year university student with a grudge and a textbook. Holmes interrupts, sliding a dog-eared volume of elementary metallurgy across the table. He flips to a page marked with a train ticket, Berlin to London. One way where a passage on gold alloy corrosion is circled in ink, so fresh, it smudges under Watson's thumb. The method isn't revolutionary. It's recycled, a variation on an 1882 German patent for dissolving sewer blockages. The doctor's cheeks flush. He's made the classic mistake, chasing the spectre of grand conspiracy, when the truth hums along in plain sight, mundane as a cab fare. Holmes leans back, steepling his fingers. You're looking for a mastermind, Watson, when you ought to be looking at the cracks in the foundation, the butler's gambling habit, the footman's sudden inheritance, Lady Eleanor's unexplained withdrawals from the family vault. His voice drops. The simplest answer isn't always the right one, but neither is the most theatrical. Outside, a carriage rattles past, its wheels spraying mud against the window pane. Somewhere in the distance, Big Ben tolls the hour, each chime a reminder. Time wasted on grand theories is time stolen from the tiny, telling details that solve cases. Watson stares at the shattered tiara, its fragments catching the light like broken promises. For the first time, he notices the pattern of the breaks, not random, but deliberate, almost artistic. Like a signature, Holmes follows his gaze. "Ah," he says softly, "now you're seeing it. Not a crime of passion or politics, but something far more intimate." A message written in ruined gold, waiting to be deciphered. The Baron von Hohenheim's alibi is pristine on paper too pristine, Holmes notes, like a suit pressed for a funeral. According to his own testimony and that of his valet, he spent the entire evening of the tiara's destruction at his rented townhouse on Grosvenor Square, hosting a private recital for a select circle of connoisseurs. The guest list, impeccable, the program, detailed down to the minute. Even the lemon cakes served at intermission bore the stamp of a renowned Mayfair patisserie, their receipts dutifully saved as proof. But Holmes doesn't examine alibis for what they include. He dissects them for what they omit. Take the carriage logs, for instance. The Baron's lacquered brougham was indeed recorded entering his mews at 7:15 and departing at 11:45. But Holmes's fingers pause over the groom's notation of a loose shoe requiring adjustment at 8:30. A trivial detail, until one notices the stallion's left foreleg, bears no such damage in the morning inspection records. Then there's the matter of the recital's star performer, a French harpist whose signature flourish, a cascading arpeggio, was reportedly played twice that evening. Yet the Baron's own music director, when pressed, admits the second performance lacked the musician's characteristic wrist snap, a telltale absence for those who know what to listen for. The valet cracks first. Under Holmes's relentless questioning, his rehearsed account of fetching the Baron's cigar case at 9:20 unravels when Watson points out the moon's position that night directly opposite the study window where the valet claims to have seen his employer reading. Unless the Baron reads by eclipse, Watson mutters and the valet's hands begin to shake, but the masterstroke comes from an unexpected source, the lemon cakes. Holmes produces one, preserved in wax paper from that very evening, its gilded edge perfectly intact, too intact. The patisserie's signature garnish, a candied violet, is absent, though the receipt lists it. A small thing, unless one knows the violets were discontinued 3 weeks prior due to a blight in Provence. The receipt, then, isn't proof. It's a prop. The Baron's alibi isn't just flawed. It's a symphony of misdirection, every note perfectly placed to draw attention from the silent beat where the truth hides. And in that silence, Holmes hears the echo of a glove squeaking on a staircase, a tiara shattering in an empty room, and the whisper of a name, Moriarty. The gaslight on Threadneedle Street flickers weakly, its glow barely piercing the thick midnight fog. Holmes presses deeper into the alcove of the shuttered clockmaker's shop, his breath shallow, his silhouette dissolved into the shadows. Across the cobblestones, beneath the skeletal arch of a condemned bridge, two figures converge, one tall, swathed in a coachman's greatcoat, the other slight, gloved hands clutching a burlap sack. The taller man's voice carries just enough to snag Holmes's attention, a dry, papery rasp, like boots on gravel. "You were seen at the stables," he hisses. The smaller figure, Marie, though her face is obscured by a widow's veil, shoves the sack forward. The fragments, as promised, now the money. A pause. Then a leather pouch changes hands, its weight clinking with the unmistakable music of gold sovereigns. But Holmes's gaze locks onto something far more telling. The way the tall man's sleeve rides up as he reaches, exposing a sliver of wrist. Not the pallid skin of a nobleman or the calloused hands of a laborer, but a tattoo, a spider, its legs entwined around a crown. The mark of dye spins inner circle. Marie turns to leave, but the man grabs her elbow. The other matter, the child's whereabouts, my employer insists. Her reply is lost to the screech of a nightjar, but Holmes doesn't need to hear it. The way her free hand flies to her bodice, where Lady Elena's secret key still hangs, is confession enough. Then the twist. The tall man tosses the sack carelessly onto a waiting cart, its contents spilling open for just a second. Not tiara fragments at all, but shattered porcelain à decoy. The real prize, Holmes realizes with a chill, was never the gold. It was the compartment's hidden ledger, now tucked inside the man's coat. And Marie, she's already vanishing into the fog, her payment worthless. Because some traps aren't set with steel, but with the oldest bait of all, a mother's desperation. The cart creaks away, its wheels muffled by the mist. Holmes remains motionless, his mind racing ahead to the next move, the Baron's gloves, the footman's Prussian ties. Even the butler's ledger. All pawns in a game where the true queen was sacrificed 3 moves ago. And now watching the spider's web tighten around a child who doesn't yet know she's the prize. Holmes does something uncharacteristic. He hesitates, because some shadows, once followed, lead to corners even he can't illuminate. Lady Elena's hands tremble as she pulls a folded letter from the hidden pocket beneath her bustle. Not the crisp stationery of high society, but cheap pulp paper, its edges frayed from handling. The ink bleeds where tears have fallen, blurring the demand scrawled across the page. £10,000 by Friday, or the world learns what really happened to your father's fortune. Holmes flattens the note against the desk, his magnifying glass hovering over the watermark, a tiny, crude drawing of a tiara, identical to the one now in fragments. This isn't just about money, Watson murmurs, noticing the way Lady Elena's gaze flicks to the portrait above the mantel. Her father, stern in his military regalia, one hand resting on the very jewel case that housed the tiara. Holmes follows her line of sight, then strides to the painting, lifting it from the wall to reveal a safe hidden behind it. The door hangs slightly ajar, its lock scratched, not by a thief's tools, but by someone who knew the combination but fumbled under pressure. The pieces click together with cold precision. The tiara's sabotage wasn't a random act of malice, it was a staged distraction. While the household panicked over the heirloom's ruin, someone slipped into this room, cracked the safe, and stole something far more damning than jewels. Your father's ledgers, Holmes deduces, watching Lady Elena's shoulders tense. Not just financial records, I presume. Her silence is answer enough. The late Lord Fairfax didn't just gamble away his fortune, he laundered money for half the crime lords in London. Their transactions hidden in plain sight as charitable donations and art acquisitions. The tiara, with its public prominence and insured value, was the perfect smokescreen. Destroy it, let the family scramble to cover the loss, and in the chaos, pluck the real prize, proof that could topple empires. But the blackmailer miscalculated. They didn't count on Lady Elena's desperation outpacing her fear, or on the second note, the one she keeps clenched in her fist, its letters cut from newspaper print, like a child's ransom demand. Bring the ledger to the greenhouse at midnight. Come alone or the girl disappears. Holmes's eyes narrow. There's no signature, no spider motif, just the faint scent of turpentine clinging to the paper. An artist's touch. Someone who deals in forgeries, perhaps, or worse. Someone who knows that the only thing more fragile than a tiara is a reputation. And Lady Elena's isn't the only one at stake. That child, the one mentioned in the hidden note, wasn't just a secret. She was leverage. Now, with the ledger gone and the clock ticking toward midnight, the game has shifted from theft to survival. The fireplace crackles, sending up a shower of sparks that dance like dying stars. Somewhere in the city, a blackmailer waits, and in a locked drawer of Holmes's desk, the real ledger, switched weeks ago by a paranoid lord, sits untouched. The tiara was never the target. It was the first domino, and Holmes is the only one who sees the full chain reaction waiting to unfold. The grandfather clock in Fairfax Manor's hall strikes 2 in the morning, its chimes swallowed by the same oppressive silence that has clung to the house since the tiara shattered. Downstairs, the constable stationed at the front door yawns into his glove, unaware of the figure slipping through the servants' entrance, a shadow among shadows, their steps muffled by the same Persian rug that caught Lady Elena's tears hours earlier. But Holmes isn't sleeping, he's waiting. Perched in the linen closet with a sightline to the blue drawing room, he watches the doorknob turn with agonizing slowness, the lock yielding not to a key, but to a needle-thin sliver of tempered steel. The intruder moves with practiced precision, bypassing the display case entirely proof they're not here for the remaining fragments. Instead, their gloved fingers go straight to the mantelpiece, prying loose a loose tile concealed behind the portrait of Lady Elena's father. The compartment behind it gapes empty, and the figure stiffens. That's when Holmes strikes, not with a shout, but with the soft click of his revolver's hammer cocking. Looking for something heavier than gold, I presume. The would-be thief spins, their face obscured by a scarf, but Holmes doesn't need to see their features. The way they favor their left leg, a detail Watson noted in the footman's gait after he twisted his ankle, chasing a pickpocket last week, betrays them before the first glove drops. But the real confession comes from their belt, a leather sheath holding not a knife, but a scribe's stylus, its tip stained with the same violet wax used to seal the tiara's case. Watson, concealed in the dumbwaiter, emerges just in time to catch the second figure fleeing through the garden, a woman's silhouette, her skirts hiked up to reveal boots meant for riding, not serving. The maid Marie, then, or someone impersonating her. Holmes doesn't give chase. He's too busy examining the mantel compartment, where a single strand of auburn hair clings to the splintered wood. Not Lady Elena's, not Marie's, the child's. The pieces fall into place with brutal clarity. This wasn't a second theft, it was a test. Someone knew the ledger had been moved, and they sent pawns to confirm it. The footman's accidental injury, Marie's staged breakdown, even the Baron's flawless alibi, all distractions from the real play, not just blackmail, but a reckoning. Because the ledger doesn't just implicate Lady Elena's father, it names names, powerful ones. Outside, a carriage rattles away into the fog, its driver whistling a Prussian cavalry tune. The game has shifted again, and this time the stakes aren't jewels or reputations. They're lives. The fireplace in Baker Street casts flickering shadows as Holmes arranges the tiara fragments with the precision of a surgeon preparing for an operation. He doesn't merely reconstruct the heirloom, he reimagines it, reinforcing the broken gold wires with nearly invisible filaments of steel, each junction wired to a tiny bell concealed in the base. A spider's web, he murmurs, is only as strong as its weakest strand, and ours, Watson, must sing when touched. Watson watches as Holmes then produces an exact replica of the original velvet case, down to the stitching along the seams, except this one bears a second compartment beneath the padding, housing a vial of liquid that mimics the reagent's iridescent sheen. Watered down gin with a dash of quinine, Holmes explains, harmless, but convincing enough to draw out our chemist. The final touch, a scrap of parchment tucked beneath the lining, its edges deliberately frayed to match the stolen ledger's missing corner. The trap is set not at Fairfax Manor, but in the last place the culprit would expect, the backroom of a pawnshop in Whitechapel. Its proprietor secretly one of Holmes's most reliable informants. The shop's ledger, doctored to show a recent purchase of one gilt headpiece, damaged, lies open on the counter, while the display case gleams under a single gas lamp. Too easy, too obvious, which is precisely why Holmes knows it will work. A criminal's greatest weakness, he whispers to Watson from their hiding place behind a moth-eaten curtain, isn't greed. It's the inability to resist verifying their own cleverness. Midnight tolls. The pawnshop's bell jingles not from the door, but from the window where a gloved hand slides through a gap in the frame. The figure moves with practiced silence, bypassing the cash box, the jewelry trays, heading straight for the display case. As the lid lifts, the bells chime, not the shrill alarm the intruder expects, but a dissonant, echoing melody that seems to come from everywhere at once. The effect is instantaneous. The figure stumbles back, gloves snagging on the wired filament, yanking the entire false back panel loose to reveal Holmes's signature flourish, playing card wedged in the mechanism. The ace of spades, its center carved into the shape of a spider. Outside, Lestrade's men close in, but Holmes isn't watching the door. His gaze is fixed on the intruder's hands as they fumble with the vial, the way the left thumb twitches. A tell he's seen only once before, in the trembling grip of a disgraced laboratory assistant named Feldspar. Not the Baron, not Moriarty, the missing link, the man who trained Marie's brother, who vanished from Berlin the same week the Prussian cavalry gloves were commissioned. The trap didn't just catch a thief. It unraveled the first thread of a web spanning 3 countries, and Holmes's fingers are already closing around the next. The cellar beneath the pawnshop reeks of damp wool and turpentine, its single lantern swinging like a pendulum as the handcuffed figure slumps onto a crate. Feldspar's gloves are gone now, revealing fingers stained yellow from chemicals. One nail split down to the quick, a detail Holmes notes with clinical detachment. "You didn't just replicate the reagent," he murmurs, holding up the vial from the decoy tiara. "You improved it. The original formula left residue. Yours evaporates cleanly." A chemist's pride, I suppose. Feldspar's laugh is a dry rasp. Pride hardly, necessity. The Baron's men wanted it untraceable. No scent, no stain, just. He mimes an explosion with his fingers. Gold into dust. Watson leans against the damp brick wall, arms crossed. And the Fairfax tiara, why destroy it instead of stealing? Because breaking something precious is louder than stealing it. Feldspar's voice drops, his accent thickening. The Baron needed the family distracted. The ledger was the real target proof of the old lord's dealings with half the crime rings in Europe. But Lady Elena moved it. So we broke her toy to make her panic, to flush it out. Holmes's gaze flicks to the playing card, still pinned to the wall, the ace of spades with its spider carving. And the child, the notes threatening her. For the first time, Feldspar's defiance cracks. That wasn't us. The Baron's orders stopped at the ledger. The girl, he swallows hard. That's Moriarty's handwriting, the second note, the one with the turpentine smell. That's his signature. He uses it to preserve old paper. The lantern creaks on its chain, casting jagged shadows. Watson stiffens. Holmes, however, goes eerily still, his eyes fixed on the cellar's far corner where a scrap of parchment clings to a splintered crate. Not part of the decoy, too old, too brittle. And there in the corner, a tiny inked spider not drawn, but stamped. Feldspar follows his gaze and pales. "You don't understand. The tiara, the ledger, even the Baron, we were all just bait. Moriarty didn't want the documents. He wanted you to find them, to follow the trail he laid." His voice drops to a whisper. "That child's not leverage, Mr. Holmes. She's the final move." Outside, the rain begins in earnest, drumming against the cobblestones like a countdown. Somewhere in the city, a chessboard sits waiting, and the spider, patient as always, watches from the center of his web. The lantern's flame gutters as Holmes turns the stamped parchment between his fingers. Not just any spider, but one with 6 legs instead of 8. A mistake unlikely. Moriarty's signatures are never careless. Watson peers over his shoulder, breath shallow. 6 legs like an insect. Like a clock, Holmes corrects softly. The revelation slices through the damp cellar air. The Baron, Feldspar, even Marie, all were moving pieces in a far older game, because the child in question isn't just Lady Eleanor's secret. She's the daughter of Colonel Sebastian Moran, Moriarty's most notorious lieutenant, presumed dead in the Reifenbach Falls incident. A man whose watch a 6-spoked wheel engraved on the casing, ticked in sync with the professor's schemes until the very end. Feldspar's arrest was never the goal, it was the signal. By luring Holmes into uncovering the ledger, Moriarty ensured the detective would trace the trail straight to Moran's lost heir. A living key to the Colonel's hidden fortune, scattered across Europe in coded accounts. The tiara's destruction, a feint within a feint. The real masterpiece was making Holmes himself the instrument of the child's exposure. Watson's medical bag slips from his shoulder with a thud. Then the blackmail notes weren't threats, Holmes finishes. They were invitations. He flips the parchment, revealing a watermark invisible until now. Not a spider, but a clock face. Its hands frozen at 11:59. 1 minute to midnight, the hour Moran always struck. Above them, the pawnshop floorboards creak under an unfamiliar weight. It's too light for Lestrade, too deliberate for the wind. A glove brushes the doorframe, leather squeaking faintly. Prussian cavalry issue. Holmes doesn't reach for his revolver. The true mastermind never enters until the stage is set. And the stage, it seems, was never the tiara, the ledger, or even the child. It was the one player Moriarty couldn't manipulate from the grave, Moran himself, alive and ticking. The cellar key turns in the lock from the outside. Not a retreat, a reunion. The scent of damp leather and old ink clings to the air as Holmes spreads a map across the pawnshop's work table. Its edges weighted down with fragments of the tiara. Not the shattered pieces from Fairfax Manor, these are fresh breaks. Raw edges glinting under the lantern light. Observe the striations. Holmes murmurs, tilting a crescent-shaped segment toward Watson. These weren't snapped under pressure. They were filed methodically over hours. Someone didn't just steal the missing fragments, they reshaped them. Watson's brow furrows as he picks up a sliver no wider than a thumbnail. But why go to the trouble? Gold is gold, surely. Unless it wasn't the gold they wanted. Holmes produces a loop, revealing microscopic symbols etched along the fragment's inner curve. Not decorations, but coordinates. Latitude and longitude, precise to the minute. The tiara's design was altered centuries ago to conceal a smuggler's map. Each gem's placement corresponded to a European port, the gold wires tracing trade routes. The Baron didn't need the whole tiara, just these 3 pieces. He taps the map, where 3 red pins mark a triangle between London, Antwerp, and a nameless cove on the Normandy coast. The smuggling method is laughably simple in hindsight. The fragments, filed thin as playing cards, were slipped between the pages of a gilded prayer book, Lady Eleanor's own, carried to morning services by her lady's maid. Marie didn't just deliver the reagent, Holmes explains. She smuggled the fragments out before the tiara shattered. The destruction was never the goal. It was a curtain drop, masking the fact the pieces were already gone. Watson exhales sharply. Then the Baron's men at the docks were waiting for the wrong shipment. Holmes unfolds a crumpled customs form, its ink smudged by seawater. The prayer book never left London. Instead, it passed through 6 unsuspecting hands: a music tutor, a florist, even a bishop, each one adding a layer of legitimacy before the fragments were sewn into the lining of a diplomat's carriage. The tiara didn't cross the channel, Holmes concludes. It rode in the pocket of a French attaché's coat, right under the nose of customs. Outside, the clatter of hooves signals Lestrade's return with the recovered pieces, wrapped in a handkerchief that smells of salt and cigar smoke. The fragments are cold to the touch, their edges dulled from handling, but the etched coordinates remain intact. Holmes arranges them on the map with the care of a man solving a child's puzzle. They align perfectly over Normandy, not a smuggling route, then a burial site. The revelation hangs in the air like gunsmoke. The tiara wasn't just a map, it was a key. And the Baron, for all his Prussian precision, was merely digging where Moriarty had already buried the treasure. The candlelight in Lady Eleanor's drawing-room trembles as she lifts a teacup, her hands steady now, her gloves no longer trembling. The shattered tiara sits reassembled on the mantel, not pristine, but whole again, its fractures filled with strands of Holmes's steel wire, the gaps between gold dusted with crushed sapphire to catch the light. It's rather beautiful in its way, she murmurs, her voice softer than Watson's ever heard it. Like kintsugi, the Japanese art of repairing broken pottery with gold. Holmes inclines his head, but his gaze lingers on the child's portrait, half hidden behind a vase of white roses. A girl with Lady Eleanor's chin and Moran's icy blue eyes. The gratitude in the room is palpable, yet laced with something sharper. Not just relief, but recognition. She knows what he's done, not merely restoring a heirloom, but burying the truth deeper than any vault. The ledger's ashes still cling to the hearth. "You've saved more than my family's name, Mr. Holmes," she says at last, unfolding a letter sealed with plain wax. Inside, a single train ticket to Dover and a lock of auburn hair. No words, none needed. The child is safe. The spider's web, for now, remains unbroken. Watson expects Holmes to demur, to retreat into his usual detachment. Instead, the detective lifts the teacup to his lips, his pause deliberate. "Some treasures, my lady, are best kept in shadows." Even from the light of justice, the fire crackles, swallowing the unspoken pact between them. Outside, the first snow of December begins to fall, blanketing the footprints leading away from Fairfax Manor fresh tracks. Too heavy for a maid, too purposeful for a thief. Someone else knows the game isn't over, and the tiara, for all its mended glory, is still missing 3 fragments. The lamplight in Baker Street throws long shadows across the reassembled tiara fragments as Holmes leans forward, his fingers tracing the repaired gold like a pianist testing a familiar melody. "Begin with the first misdirection," he murmurs, plucking the vial of fake reagent from the display case. The shattered tiara seemed the crime's centerpiece, but destruction was never the Baron's aim. It was camouflage. His fingertip pauses on the tiny puncture in the central setting. This mark, not from the reagent, but from a syringe extracting a sample of the alloy, tested to confirm its purity before the true theft. Watson's teacup hovers midair as Holmes unfolds a shipping manifest dated the day before the ball. The Baron needed 3 specific fragments, each containing coordinates from an ancestral smuggling map. But stealing them outright would have alerted Lady Eleanor to the tiara's true value. So he taps the vial, He staged a ruin so spectacular, no one noticed the pieces were already gone, smuggled out by Marie in the prayer book's spine during polishing. The firelight catches the spider-stamped parchment, still pinned to the wall. Moriarty's involvement, a feint. The six-legged spider wasn't his signature, it was Moran's, stamped to lure me into exposing the child as bait for her fugitive father. Every step the footman's Prussian ties, the butler's ledger, even Marie's weeping was choreographed to make us chase shadows, while the Baron's men followed the real map. Holmes lifts the final fragment, its edge filed unnaturally smooth. And the Normandy coordinates, not for treasure, for a weapon. Moran's prototype submarine designs, buried where the tides would preserve them. The tiara didn't guide thieves to gold. It led warmongers to war machines. He sets the piece down with a quiet click. The greatest trick wasn't breaking the tiara. It was making the world believe its shattering was the end game, when in truth, his gaze flicks to the window where dawn's first light glimmers. It was the first move in a game we've only just begun to play. Watson sets down his pen, the ink still fresh on the pages of his journal, and lets out a slow breath. The fire in Baker Street's hearth has burned low, casting long shadows that seem to mimic the tangled threads of the case they've just unraveled. "Extraordinary, Holmes," he murmurs, shaking his head. "To think we began with a broken tiara and ended at the edge of an international conspiracy, each piece of the puzzle more improbable than the last." His fingers trace the rim of his teacup, now gone cold. "And yet you saw it all from the first fracture in the gold." Holmes, perched in his usual chair with a violin resting idle against his shoulder, offers no false modesty. "The fragments spoke, Watson, not merely of sabotage, but of intention. A crime's shape is often clearest in what the perpetrator doesn't do. The Baron didn't steal the tiara because theft would have been too simple, too quiet. He needed spectacle, chaos, a distraction grand enough to make the world ignore the quiet, slipping away of three unremarkable slivers of metal. His bow drifts across the strings, producing a single, dissonant note. The truth, as ever, was in the gaps." Watson leans back, his mind replaying the whirlwind of the past days, the Prussian gloves, the chemist's terrified confession, the way Lady Elena's hands had trembled not from fear of exposure, but from the relief of a secret kept. "What strikes me most," he muses, "is how close we came to playing right into Moriarty's hands. Even from the grave, the man's schemes unfold like clockwork." A faint smile touches Holmes's lips. "Ah, but clocks can be reset, Watson." He plucks a telegram from the table. An unsigned message arrived that morning, its ink smudged by rail soot. "Normandy tides unseasonably high. No sign of excavation." Holmes tucks it into his pocket with deliberate calm. The game is never truly over, only paused. Outside, a carriage rattles past, its lamps cutting through the fog. Somewhere in the city, a new mystery unfolds, its first clues hidden in plain sight. Watson closes his journal, but not before jotting one final line. "The greatest puzzles are those we've yet to realize exist." The violin begins again, its melody neither triumphant nor somber, but something far more intriguing. The sound of a mind already turning toward the next enigma. And in the flickering firelight, the reassembled tiara gleams, its fractures a reminder. Some breaks are mended and others are the very cracks through which the light gets in.